all-water passage like Jefferson's hoped for, in everything that they did. The expedition was serious, and they prepared carefully. They took a keel boat that was 55 feet long and 8 feet wide, with a mast, room for 22 oars, a cannon on the bow, and a blunderbuss on the stern. It could carry 30 tons of freight and moved by sail, oars, poles, or ropes pulled from the riverbank. So that's how they navigated into this area. They brought 2 smaller boats with them, and they had the best tools, the weapons, provisions, and instruments available to them. It was not a camping trip, it was a national project dressed in buckskin and river mud, is how they describe it. When Lewis and Clark reached the Salmon River country in 1805, they encountered a landscape more difficult than expected. Lewis described the river as foaming and roaring through rocks in every direction so as to render the passage of anything but impossible. And then in the middle of this story, when they were out there, who did they meet? Sacagawea, right? Sacagawea remains one of the most remembered women in early history. She was a Lemhi Shoshone woman from the Salmon River region who had been taken from her people as a girl and later brought east. Still in her teens and carrying her infant son through much of the journey, she joined the expedition. And that is the only reason they even survived. When they reached Idaho and got to the point where the river of no return, she recognized the area even though she was so young when she was taken from it, and helped them find and navigate, and her knowledge of the land and also the Shoshone language is the reason why they even survived any of it. So where did Brigham Young decide to send his people? The reports of Lewis and Clark, along with other expeditions, proved valuable to Brigham Young and the pioneers as they settled the West. Just in general, many of the places on the trip, the trail here to get the Saints even to the Salt Lake Valley was a trail that had been mapped by Lewis and Clark in their expedition. So they were familiar with this information. And Brigham Young was looking for a back door out of Salt Lake because a way out, a way to escape because of the relations with the government and Johnson's army, okay? And we don't really hear much about that. We know they left, we know that they covered the temple, we hear all the history and stuff like that, but one of the things that Brigham Young did in looking for this was set up a Salmon River mission. And that's actually what we're talking to, so not purely the history of this, but that's kind of what him looking at those maps that Lewis and Clark, trying to understand the valley, trying to protect the Saints, trying to say, okay, if we get forced out, we are not going to surrender to this anymore. But we need someplace safe we can send our women and children if the army comes after us. We need something that we need to do. So, did he gather the best equipment, the best blunderbuss? Did he build a boat? Did he do any of these things? No, he just called 27 young men to establish what became known as the Salmon River Mission among the native peoples in central Idaho. They had been told to quickly prepare, and so he wanted to go out to where he knew their natives were and see if he could establish a place there. So these 27 men were told to leave as quickly as possible. They actually got ready in 27 days instead of the years that Lewis and Clark took to gather his supplies and stuff on his mission. Their purpose when they got there, according to their mission instructions from the prophet, was to not only settle, but to teach, build, and preach among the Bancock, Shoshone, and any other tribes that would receive them. And they left with this 5 to 6 weeks time to prepare. They packed provisions, tools, clothing, and supplies to last a year. Though the reality on the ground quickly laughed at their planning. They were relatively unorganized at first, and finally did, about halfway there, recognize Thomas S. Smith as their leader. They had 13 wagons, each with 2 yoke of cattle, plus a few extra cows. They also took provisions to eat and those kind of things as they were. They were also instructed they were to build roads as they traveled, and if they came to a river that could not be forded, they were to build a bridge or a ferry. In other words, they were not just moving through the country, they were trying to make a way through it for others who might come later. So it's somewhat like the hole in the rock as they came, right? So it took them a very long time to take care of that, but their whole point was to find a shorter route, right? And so they came with dynamite and tools and men who knew do these kind of things. The men that they chose to go were probably skilled in some of the things that they needed, but just such a undertaking here. Go make this habitable, go do these things. So after a journey of about 380 miles from Salt Lake City, they descended into the Salmon River Valley on June 15th, 1855. Now, just to remind you, Lewis and Clark came through 50 years earlier than this, okay? So these are not 2 back-to-back events. This is 50 years later when the saints are in the valley and using some of this information. At that time, they chose a site for the settlement and eventually built what became Fort Limhi. It later spelled, now I've been saying Limhi because that's how I've written it, and that's how it was originally known, Limhi. But they changed it to Fort Lemhi, Lemhi. Why? Because that's a name in the Book of Mormon of one of the prophets. And so they use the Lemhi now to this day because that's the way. So you will see Lim, I-M, in some of the maps that are marked, but whenever it's talked about in history, they even now call it Lemhi. And there is a town out there called Lemhi. So they picked this place that they thought was right. They actually, when they got word back to Salt Lake, Brigham Young was quite unhappy with them because they had gone further than they were further away than he thought they should have been. He was hoping they'd be a little closer. So it could, be easier for this route. But in the first year, immediately, they constructed cabins, fort walls, gates, fencing, a well, a blacksmith shop, and a sawmill. They planted crops. They attempted irrigation. They studied the Shoshone language 3 times a week, and many of them became very skilled in the language. They arrived during fishing season, so they learned through their relationships with the native people there and the skills that they needed in order to preserve the salmon, and were able to put that into that. They benefited from that themselves. But the place fought back. The work was exhausting. The crops were planted late. The grasshoppers desired them just the same as they did back in Salt Lake, but no stories of seagulls here. They lost their crops to that. The seeds were scarce, the food ran low, and they also accepted the fact that they were heavily outnumbered by the Indian tribes there. And so they guarded their cattle and traveled in groups and stayed armed at all times. But one of the best windows into the early spirit of the mission is a letter from William Burgess, who was sent to George A. Smith. Burgess wrote that they had access to 4 of the tribes that were in the area and said, quote, "The Indians here are the noblest race I have ever seen in the West." He praised their honesty, noting that tools and clothing could lie out for days and nothing had been stolen. It is an important reminder that the story did not begin in hostility, and it began with respect, curiosity, and some genuine cooperation. I can't help but think when I read through that the fact that their first encounter with white people from the East was a friendly one because of Sacagawea and the fact that she was there and she was able to introduce them and speak the language and convey to the tribes in the area 50 years before the Saints even got their pioneers. that they were not necessarily out there to just steal their land and kill them and do all the things that we think of about the relations between the Indian tribes and the settlers. So I felt that was a testament to the power of having women involved in some things and her help to them. While the missionaries endured hardship in Idaho, their families in Utah were also paying the price. Wives and children have been left in destitute conditions. They too suffered crop loss, hunger, and the so-called hard winter crickets. Some lived on roots and the thin meat of animals that had died in the cold. One missionary, William Bateman, learned that his wife had died while he was away. For all the public language of the mission and the necessity of the settlement, the private costs fell heavily on the women and children involved. I picked out just a couple of those women's stories, just a couple of paragraphs each. Susan Marler Harmon came from a family that had already endured devastating loss on the journey west. Cholera had taken her family members one after another. Her father had died, her mother had died after childbirth, her siblings, all but one, had died, and still the family pushed on to Utah. Susan later married Henry Martin Harmon, and soon after their marriage, 6 months actually when I looked up the dates, soon after their marriage he left for the Salmon River Mission. Her husband was respected by the Indians because he quickly learned their language. He had been given that gift and was also an excellent marksman, which made him valuable in 2 ways, right? They aren't going to let him go home, visit his wife. Susan life tells us something powerful. Pioneer women were simply not left behind. They buried family, crossed plains, raised children, suffered hunger, supported the mission of the church with all their heart. I thought that was an interesting one. Emily Jane Pearson Clark. She was married at 16. She was pregnant when she became one of the women connected to Fort Lim High. So she came about 6 months after they did get news back to Brigham Young, and some of the wives came. She was pregnant at the time that she did it. She gave birth to her son as they got to the fort. But during the disbanding of the mission in 1858, while the party was on its way home through danger and uncertainty, she gave birth again, this time to a daughter. Imagine that scene, a mission collapsing, winter hardship, tribal tensions, evacuation, and in the middle of it all, a mother bringing another child into the world on the move. Emily's later life was full of more labor, more settlement, more loss. And more perseverance. She buried all of her children. She followed rough trials and helped build new homes on the way. Okay, this is the sister that I just told you about, Sarah Harmon, Susan Harmon, that married the sharpshooter and linguist. On the way to the west, years earlier, William Bailey Lake fell in love with 15-year-old Sarah Jane Marler. These are the 2 sisters, the only surviving members of their family. She's actually the younger sister, but got married first. They married and built a life in Ogden and had children, and then Bailey was called to the Salmon River Mission, leaving Sarah Jane at home with the children. As so many women were left at Fort Limhi, Bailey proved faithful and hardworking, but during the mission's evacuation in 1858, he was attacked and killed in an Indian fight. His body was later recovered and returned to his family. In a few lines of history, it is easy to say that Bailey died bravely, but if we pause and look again, we see Sarah Jane, young, married, building a home, and then suddenly windowed by a mission that had demanded her husband's absence. And that is the cost that she carried in silence. By 1857 and 58, the mission situation became a lot more dangerous. The more of us that showed up, the more unhappy the Indians became. That and the fact that they had put themselves in an area that was more vulnerable and not easy to defend, and they hadn't really worked very much on the forts. and those kind of things. They were so focused on the food and production and trying to make a place that people could come to that they were quite vulnerable, and the Indians did attack mainly because of what was happening with the armies all around, because the United States, and that was all starting to get stirred up. The government was mad at us about a lot of things. Polygamy, the way we handled the Indians. They didn't like us making friends with the Indians. They just wanted them killed and gone at this point. Although that did change. They didn't like that we were in a place that they didn't feel like that we were under federal control. President Buchanan sent troops into the West, which deepened the fear of all the Indians in the area, and that's when the uprisings started to happen. The Salmon River missionaries were unaware at first of the full crisis, and were still threshing wheat and trying to secure their settlement and those kind of things. But as more forts and fences appeared and as more settlers competed for resources, some of the former friendly native groups became more aggressive. They didn't understand, the missionaries did not understand, because these people had become their friends, that things and tensions had risen so high. And they kind of stepped into this web of everything going on and got caught in it. And it's really sad to kind of read some of the men's stories too about some of the things that happened as they were trying to protect themselves. So in 1848, the fort at Limhi was attacked. The livestock was taken, the men were killed, the settlers tried to wait for Brigham Young and help from Salt Lake, and eventually rescue parties did come. And Brigham Young ordered the mission abandoned about 3 years after it was set up. They left behind much of what they had built, and it was the end of the mission, but not the end of its meaning. I think that this story is an effort of faith, but it's also an effort of miscalculation and courage and loss. The story of the explorers who discovered the West, and that it could not easily be mastered, and the missionaries who labored, sacrificed, and struggled as a settlement brought hope and conflict to the land. But above all, I feel like this is a story of many that we've learned about over many years of DUP service, of sacrifice, as the family and the women of the church lived with scarcity and carried burdens that often went unseen. Though it only lasted 3 years, the Salmon Mission left a legacy of endurance and definitely shaped the future of the settlements, the future movement as they moved and where they were willing to go and how they had left their mark on the line. And one of the things that I think that we don't think about much is it also influenced the policy of the church. What's the first thing our missionaries do when they get called to foreign lands?
Learn the language.
They learn the language and they learn the culture of the place where they're going to go. Before they ever start studying their lessons or those kind of things, they focus on the language. They focus on trying to meet the people that they're going to try to love and fellowship and teach on their level. And I think that that's one thing that the church didn't always get right when it came to the Indians. We've got a few Mountain Meadow massacres in our history and a few things like that. But I think that was their attitude in general, and it really did make a difference. Yes.
I just have a grandson who was just called to the Baltimore mission, Haitian speaking. And it involves 4 different states. It's that big. Yeah, Haitian speaking.
Are there DUP markers up there?
Yes.
Are there?
Yeah, the fort is still standing.
Oh.
You can go see the fort and those kind of things. It's marked on the.
Is it
No,
in
it's
Charles?
not. But it's above the Salmon Ribbon just a little bit, and you can look it up, and it's marked, and the some of the bridges and roads that they built are the same ones we use today, just like they are every place else. They've been widened and paved, but they've left a lot of legacy of those kind of things. So I didn't really know much about it when I started, but it was very interesting to me, and I guess I'm just really grateful that we have these lessons, because it makes me think outside of just the primary stories of what we hear and what we do, and we sing of them walking as they go and some of these kind of things, but the sacrifices that they made as they spread out, I mean, I thought it was bad to be sent to St. George, I think I'll go in a second. Rather than have to haul out the Salmon River and learn an Indian language and plant crops, and then if I get in the river, oh, well, we're not gonna wash our clothes in the river because, 57 miles later, you're gonna get your underwear back.
If you run fast.
So I think it's really neat, and I know I've now got it on my list of some place to go. It's a little bit different direction than Chesterfield, but it is someplace to go, yeah.
I'm just gonna tell you, if you're gonna go there, there is a city by the name of Shoshone, and they have ice caves. You can go down,
Oh,
and they're beautiful.
The features, the landscape features in Idaho are just amazing. The craters, the waterfalls, everything. It's just, I think, I don't want to tell anybody about it because then it'll be crowded. But they're incredible places there, and
I grew up in Boise.
oh, beautiful, beautiful place.
Well, they did put the river of no return on the back of the 2019 Idaho quarter.
Oh.
Like, so it made it to a quarter.
That's true. They know, and I don't know, the women are just, I mean, we cringe at 14 and 16 and stuff like that, but, these young women had been dealing with how to take care of their lives and live a day without power their whole entire lives. I really do feel like they had. And not all of them married old men and married in polygamy. A lot of them married young men that were not much older than they were. And they were out there and they gave all their strengths to trying to build and do the things
The obedience.
that was needed. Yeah.
We have a 18-year-old.
Thank you for the lesson.
Thank you so much, Donalyn. That was excellent. I just sit here and I just marvel at how much God is in our lives. Yes, we have hardships. We go through things, but it's all for a reason. I'm thinking that trials are supposed to make us stronger and taller. I ought to be about 20 foot tall. You wonder why you still have much to learn. I'm just really glad for the lessons. I have learned so much. There are things I would not study on my own.
My daughter homeschools her kids, and one of the reasons I buy these books is because she uses them to teach Utah history. Because there's so much information in them that's outside of
The
just,
curriculum?
this is where they went,
Yeah.
this is where they.
Yeah. I bought that Lewis and Clark DVD from, I think BYU produced it, or, public broadcasting. Hal Holbrook was the narrator, and it's just a fascinating story. Fascinating.
Yeah.
They took specimens of animals and things that were exotic, and snakes and possums, and nobody back east had seen these things, and the rough ways they treated Meriwether's, wasn't he the sicker one of the two?
Yeah, and then Sacagawea actually had a child, and then her husband was with them for a while. Too, he was a French man. What was his name?
Mr. Sacagawea.
No.
He did run off and leave like the French
Yeah,
tend
he
to do.
did.
So.
I forgot his name too, but.
I wish I had paid more attention to history in school. I didn't care for it, but I love it now. I was love to learn. So thank you again.
For that, what are you doing in May again for Susan?
We're going to do ice cream and cake.
Okay. May
21?
21? Okay. Will that work? Does that fit your schedule? I'll be back.
We will be praying for you, Teresa.
I think I'm gonna make it
May 21st.
May 21st.
I think you picked my paper up.
Oh, I think I set it to the, I might have. Yes, I did. Here it is. A road map. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. All right. May 21st is the next meeting, the history of Sharon. And I'll give the lesson on the 125th birthday of DUP. And we'll do ice cream and cake.
We better have candles too, 125.
I'd have to get a fire permit. Okay, if there's no other business, I guess we will adjourn our meeting and meet again in May.
And can I turn in my birthday present? You already gave it to me.
I wasn't sure. You want the chocolate out of it?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay, here.
Motion to adjourn.
The wind seems to have settled down.
Don't we need to do the motion to adjourn?
I think I read something where we don't. I don't know.
We don't do